Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my episode here today. This is called The Beginner's Guide to Jethro Tull. This is a new series I'm starting up on the channel, something that's a little bit experimental, so you'll have to bear with me as I figure out the format and figure out the best way to approach this topic, but I thought it would be a good idea to talk about my experiences with these classic prog bands and my introduction to them, maybe talk a little bit about the bands in general and a little bit of their history and some of the things that developed as they went about their career, as a little bit of a way of a primer for those of you just getting into these bands. You know, I talk a lot about progressive rock music, and sometimes subscribers come up to me and say, is there a video you can point me to that will give me more information of where to start for prog music and things like that? So for those who are looking to start into Jethro Tull and who haven't dove into their music yet, I feel like this is a good way to get acclimated and for me to give some recommendations of where to start and some of the more notable pieces of their discography, at least from my perspective. And like I said, this is just my perspective as one certain kind of listener. I know other people will have different ideas and different ways to approach their music, but this is my approach and the way that Jethro Tull has meant something to me, and hopefully I can share that with you guys through this video. Hopefully it'll stay pretty short and I'll just be able to give you guys a little bit of an intro here. So first of all, Jethro Tull are a British progressive rock band formed in Blackpool, Lancashire in 1967. They played quite an eclectic mix of music, blues rock, some jazz fusion, incorporating some English folk music, some hard rock, some classical music, and all blending together to form this somewhat of a signature progressive rock sound. The founder and principal composer, band leader, main member of the group is Ian Anderson, who's the lead vocalist. He also plays flute. The flute is a very prominent instrument throughout their whole career and one of the defining features of the band. They've had many members throughout the years. Guitarists Mick Abrahams and Martin Barr are some of the more notable, significant contributors to the group. Bassist Glenn Cornick, Jeffrey Hammond, John Glasscock, Dave Pegg, and Jonathan Noyce, drummers Clive Bunker, Barrymore Barlow, and Doane Perry, and keyboardist John Evan, Dee Palmer, Peter John Vettis, and Andrew Giddings are some of the members that they've had throughout their career and catalog. So a lot of different lineups, a lot of different members, but of course Ian Anderson is always the prominent figure who leads the band throughout all these iterations. And they're a band that has gone through many different shifts and changes throughout their career. They started as a little bit more of that blues rock flavor with This Was and Stand Up and even Benefit. Moved a little bit more towards the progressive rock direction when they did Aqualung, which many people considered a concept album, but the band kind of rallied against that they didn't consider it a concept album. In fact, they kind of poked fun at the idea of a concept album with their next Thick as a Brick, which is probably their most acclaimed album from a progressive rock perspective, but started out as a little bit of a satirical take on the genre and on concept albums in general. So kind of funny that an album that was meant to poke fun at a genre ended up becoming one of the most defining albums of that genre over time. So really funny little footnote. Passion Play came after that one, which was another concept album in much the same mold as Thick as a Brick, maybe not quite as successful, but has found a cult following as well. And they shifted a little bit more into more of a contemporary folk period of the band with songs from The Wood, Heavy Horses, and Stormwatch in the later 70s. And then moved into more electronic sounds in the 80s with some big lineup changes and different things going on, notably winning I believe it was a metal performance Grammy at the time, which was a little bit odd because, you know, not many people would consider them a metal band. So a lot of fun throughout their career, and they've had several albums even since then. They've basically disbanded back in like 2014 or so. Ian Anderson was focused more on his solo recordings, but then they have had a resurgence recently with bringing back the Jethro Tull name for the last two albums, The Zealot Gene in 2022 and Rock Flute in 2023, showing that this is a band with longevity and that's still making music today, which is really exciting. So this is a band from my history with the group. My dad isn't a huge Jethro Tull fan. For those of you who don't know, my dad's the one who mainly introduced me into progressive rock. He was a huge fan back in the 70s. He loves Yes, Genesis, and Gentle Giant primarily. He was aware of Thick as a Brick, and he definitely shared Thick as a Brick with me when I was getting into those early progressive rock albums. But aside from that, he wasn't really a big fan of their greater catalog, so I had to discover a lot of it on my own. I discovered a lot of Aqualung just from my own explorations into classic rock when I was a teenager. I feel like Aqualung can sit side by side with a lot of the classic rock of the era, with things like the title track Aqualung and Locomotive Breath, which are staples in classic rock. You know, those are the types of tracks that I heard when I was like a teenager and getting into more, you know, classic rock music. And so that was my introduction to Jethro Tull, was those like hit tracks. I think I had a best of Jethro Tull collection on CD at some point when I was a teenager and listened to a lot of those classic tracks, and that was my impression of what the band was. And when I was starting to get into progressive rock, I was really blown away that they had a full-blown progressive rock concept album, Thick as a Brick, that was just like one song throughout the whole record. It was a really cool experience to see them in their proggiest state with that record. But beyond that, I really discovered them on my own. I think my dad got me a CD of Songs from the Wood, which he also likes. So I did hear a bit of that album, which I've always really enjoyed also. But really, I discovered albums one by one as I went through my own progressive rock journey, and Passion Play has always been the one that stood out to me, and I've never understood why it's not held in as high regard as Thick as a Brick, because I think it's just as brilliant as that album. But that's just my own opinion as a progressive rock fan. I love all of the musical motifs and moments, and that it's one long suite. I feel a little bit fatigued by the whole Hare Who Lost the Spectacles story that plays out in the middle. You know, this little like kind of cutesy spoken word section that's like you're listening to a storytelling. But beyond that, there's so much cool music to enjoy on the whole record, and some really harder moments, some really progressive moments, and some really fun things going on. I would recommend that to any prog fan if it's one you've shied away from. So now we get into the recommendation side of the coin. And so if you're just getting into Jethro Tull, I think Aqualung is probably the most like traditional place to start from. That's probably their most notable album, and one that would ease you into the world, because there's little touchstones of progressive rock in it, but I think largely it stays a lot in that classic rock vein with a little bit of blues rock thrown into the mix and a little bit of folk. It introduces you into this style very gently. It's not like over the top progressive rock. You know, Thick as a Brick might be a little bit of an intense starting point for someone who's not really supremely familiar with progressive rock. If you're already a huge prog fan and you haven't really heard Jethro Tull music yet, I think Thick as a Brick is actually the point to start from, and you'd be super impressed with what they're able to do conceptually with that record. It's one of the standouts in the genre. It's hard to imagine someone huge into prog rock who hasn't heard it before, but you never know. So I think that would be an excellent place to start with, and get into Passion Play a little bit later down the line when you've acclimated to Thick as a Brick. But if you're into the more folkier sounds, I don't think there's any problem starting with Songs from the Wood, which is a brilliant, really nice folky album that has a lot of accessibility to it, and some great shorter tracks that introduce you to this feel of the flute and singing of Ian Anderson and his more clever wordplay, but it's nothing too over the top or crazy or strange, and is a great starting point. I think Heavy Horses is also a good little starting point as well. A cool album that has some cool hard-hitting songs, but also some of that clever wordplay and, you know, folky elements as well. I think those are great starting points for anyone getting into the band. Or you could just start at the beginning. I know some of their earlier albums are really highly regarded, like Stand Up and Benefit especially, are some that people really love that showcase that early bluesy flavor to their sound. I'd shy away probably from their more current records till I've established more of a connection with their past catalog, you know, because it's interesting to see the development through the years and to see where they've gone from there. And I think some of the new records are a little bit of more of a mixed bag, and it would be better to stay centered in like the late 60s, 70s material before you really jump in. Broadsword and the Beast is maybe an exception. It's a cool record that showcases where they were heading in the 80s, so maybe that's one to put some attention towards. But yeah, I would really focus more on the 70s and into their classic classic era and start somewhere like Aqualung or Songs from the Wood. Those would be great starting points, or Stand Up. I think those are the places to go to for Jethro Tull. So just a little bit of a discussion about Jethro Tull, and I'd love to get some people in the comments, those who are more seasoned Jethro Tull fans, to weigh in about great starting points for Jethro Tull and maybe some of their history with the group and how they got into them. My biggest way of getting into the group was through the channel, if I'm being honest. You know, with the release of the Zealot Gene, it renewed some interest in Jethro Tull, and I wanted to dive deep into their catalog, so I actually did a deep listen to their whole discography and did a ranking show, which I'll link for you guys. I'm also doing a revisiting the ranking show in an upcoming episode, so I'll be able to talk more in depth about their catalog there as well. So this was just a little bit of a quick view of them and what they're all about. So hopefully you enjoyed this show. Let me know if this is something you're interested in seeing more of in these upcoming months. And I'm hoping to cover a lot of cool classic prog bands in this fashion. So thank you guys for joining me, and hopefully you'll catch me in a future episode. Thanks everybody. Bye.